Hello there, and welcome to Crime Analyst, where we take in-depth views into everything crime and criminal investigation. Today we are going to be reviewing what the final days of a death row inmate are like. If you're curious like we are, you've probably wondered what it's like preparing for a state-sanctioned execution, and in particular, what the inmate feels and experiences in those final days. We are here to give you that detailed account of just what goes on in the final days of death row. The capital punishment is a hot-button issue, and in recent years has had its fair share of controversy and buzz. On one hand, you have people who maintain that the capital punishment is justifiable and serves as a deterrent to stop the commission of heinous crimes like murder. These people reason that without the death penalty, there will be little action we can take to curb some of society's worst crimes. They also reason that if the death penalty is abolished, the state will have to spend thousands of taxpayers' money to maintain these criminals over the course of years, and it will be simply cheaper for the state to get rid of them. Another argument is that it is only fair that murderers receive the same fate they meted out to others, and that the families of the victims will have more closure from the deaths of the murderers than any other form of punishment. On the other side of things, you have the argument that life is sacred, and it would be unfair to take a life, even the life of a murderer. Activists against the death penalty claim that killing people in an attempt to teach people that killing is inherently wrong is counterintuitive. There is also the factor that not everyone who is convicted of a crime is guilty of it, and the probability of killing an innocent person is simply not worth the risk. Notwithstanding the various views regarding capital punishment, it continues to be legal in many states and continues to be carried out, though with less frequency in recent times. In fact, of the 27 states, excluding the federal government and the military, in which the death penalty is still legal, only 78 executions have been made from 2018 until date, compared to an almost double 145 executions from 2013 to 2017. However, even with the rarity of these executions, there are still certain procedures that are followed to ensure a hitch-free process. This procedure usually starts from when the inmate on death row is informed about the order for their execution. This is usually done 60 days before the day of the execution, and it is here that the clock starts ticking down. As you would expect, this comes with its fair share of personal turmoil for the inmate, even more than they would have experienced since being on death row. Although the average time spent on death row in the United States is 20 years, for death row inmates, that time is spent with the constant knowledge that at any point in time, the order for their execution may be given. It's hard to get comfortable with living when you are aware that it can be taken away from you at any time. For some inmates, this time is spent coming to terms with the fact of their demise. For most inmates, though, this time is spent appealing and fighting against the sentence. However, once the notice of the execution is given, things start to move rather quickly. Not much changes in terms of routine for the prisoners, as they continue to live and relate as they normally would in prison. The only difference? The knowledge that the end is inching closer with every passing day. Things start to get a little more interesting a week to the day. The inmate is finally moved to the death watch area, which is close to the execution chamber. This area is very heavily guarded, and the inmate is on constant watch to ensure that they do not attempt to hurt themselves or others. Inmates do have a measure of solitude in the death house and mostly spend their days writing, speaking to their families, and reflecting. Most of the activity in this time, however, is from the government as they start preparing for the execution. Different states have different forms of execution, and each has its own peculiar preparation methods. Delaware, Washington, and New Hampshire execute death row inmates by hanging, a method that has been denounced as medieval and cruel by many. However, states like Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi prefer to use the electric chair, though this form of execution still isn't very popular. The most ethical mode of execution in recent times is death by lethal injection, used by states like California and Arizona, in which the inmate is injected with a lethal dose that usually includes the trio of midazolam, potassium chloride, and vicuronium bromide. For the states that use this form of execution, getting the supply of these drugs can be quite tricky. Since, as we mentioned earlier, executions have dwindled in frequency, it isn't uncommon that pharmaceutical companies don't have supply of the chemicals. In these cases, states have sometimes resorted to some pretty weird alternatives, which have sometimes ended awfully. An example of this is the Lockett case, which happened in April 2014. Clayton Lockett, who had been sentenced to death in 2000 for rape, murder, and kidnapping, had been injected with a mixture of untested drugs during his execution, but things took a drastically disastrous turn when the poison caused his veins to explode. Even though the botched execution was halted, he died of a resultant heart attack. For the inmate, though, it's just more routine and more mental preparation. Whatever efforts being made in an attempt to stall the order will be intensified during this time, and the inmate will have to contend with both the stress of fighting to stay alive and the fear that it would not be enough, and in the end, they will be killed. They usually keep contact with human rights activists and their lawyers, pushing to have their verdict overturned, or at least have the order of execution stayed. Their families also work hand in hand with these human rights groups in the hopes of avoiding the death of their loved one. Some inmates do not fight the order, weirdly enough, and accept their fate. It is also around this time that reporters interview and record the last moments of the inmates. They ask questions the public are curious to have answered, and this gathers a lot of public buzz around the execution. The day of the execution, the inmate has a chance to see their family and friends one final time. They also have the chance to see a chaplain, if they so wish. They will shower and change into clothes that, barring any drastic last-minute changes, will be the last clothes they will ever wear. Eventually, they will get to receive the infamous last meal. There have been a lot of unusual last meal requests, from Victor Harry Fager's request of a single olive with the pit left in, to Philip Workman's request of a vegetarian pizza to be donated to the homeless. Some prisoners, like serial killer Ted Bundy, refuse to have a last meal. About an hour and a half to the execution chamber is readied and a team of technicians, including medical practitioners, are at the ready. In this time, witnesses to the execution, which include the victim's family or victims' families, reporters, and even the families of the inmate, will be seated in the witness room. Also present with them will be a representative of the Attorney General and the inmate's attorney. The prisoner is finally brought into the execution chamber 30 minutes before the execution and strapped, ready to receive their sentence. Right before the execution is carried out, a final call is made to the governor's office to confirm that the execution has not been overturned or stayed. Once the go-ahead is given, the inmate will finally be executed. A medical examiner will confirm whether or not the inmate is dead, and eventually their body will be processed and released to their family. This finally concludes the process of executing a prisoner. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you enjoyed watching, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications to continue getting thrilling content like this. You should also share this with your family and friends, as it really helps the channel. We'll catch you in the next one.